Good afternoon to you. 506 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news, baby. Coming up, Dr. Kevin Roberts from the Heritage Foundation will be with us ahead of a big fight for who becomes the next Speaker of the House. A couple of candidates out there. There's some reporting that Donald Trump will be possibly showing up in D.C. next week for that event. What's going to happen? We'll talk to Kevin Roberts about that. And we'll chat with you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Cash for castrations. That's one of the latest genius things that the Biden administration is now funding. Cash for castrations. Yep. You've heard of cash for clunkers. Did you hear about cash for castrations? Planned Parenthood, which is heavily subsidized by the federal government, is helping teenagers transition after a 30-minute consult. Parents and doctors are sounding the alarm. The Washington Free Beacon with the jaw-dropping reporting this week. They start this way. Aaron Sibarium, fantastic reporter. Fred has a history of developmental issues. He was diagnosed with autism, technically ADHD with autistic traits, at age 4. Struggled with depression and anxiety as he got older. It was expelled from 3 different special needs schools due to behavioral problems, stemming in part from an impulse control disorder. He's an 18-year-old high school student in New Jersey, and he lives with his parents, who asked that the Washington Free Beacon withhold his real name. Like many people on the autism spectrum, Fred cycles through obsessions and extreme views. He was a part of an alt-right group chat as recently as last year, his parents said, but apostatized suddenly, and now considers himself far left. Still, Fred has a few interests that have remained constant throughout his life, all fairly typical for a teenage boy: guns, power tools, and metalworking. That made it all the more shocking when, in December of 2022, last December, at 17 years old, he announced that he was a transgender woman. Right, so the setup here is that this is a troubled kid. He's on the autism spectrum. He's kind of been all over the place in terms of his interests. And now suddenly in December of 2022, he announced he's a transgender woman. Last year, he's 17 years old. That there is, we've talked to Chloe Cole about this and others. There have been, as Kamala Harris might like to reference, if you have a Venn diagram of people on the autism spectrum and people who are pushed into the gender industry, the transgender industry, there's a heavy intersection between people with autism and those who are taken advantage of and told, hey, you were born in the wrong body. And this appears to be the case here. The revelation came a few months after Fred's best friend, who also has autism, began identifying as transgender. That's a familiar pattern, isn't it? Concerned that this was another phase, but open to the possibility that it wasn't, Fred's parents tried to enroll their son, whom they were now calling by a female name at home, in the Gender and Autism program at Children's National Hospital. There you go. The only gender clinic in the country specializing in autistic youth. Fred was determined to take hormones, they told the clinic, which is known for its lengthy assessments. Before he did, they wanted to be sure that his dysphoria wasn't transient or peer-driven. The clinic informed them in March, that would be March of this year, that it had a wait list of about a year. And Fred, who would be turning 18 in 2 months, wasn't willing to wait. So in late July, just a few months ago, while his parents were out of town, and after he had come of age, Fred went to Planned Parenthood. Okay, this is where things get crazy. So Fred is a boy. Fred, this is, of course, the name is a pseudonym, but Fred, whatever his real name is a man. He's 18 years old. What does Planned Parenthood have to offer Fred? What specifically, if you were to think of, like, why would you send a man to Planned Parenthood? For what purpose would that occur? A man can't carry a baby. A man can't go somewhere where they kill the baby. A man would not have a relationship with Planned Parenthood as a result. You would think. At least that's what I thought until I encountered this piece. Planned Parenthood prescribes hormones to any legal adult without a letter from a therapist or a formal diagnosis of gender dysphoria. The only requirement is a brief consultation, usually with a nurse practitioner, about the drug's effects, which range from mood swings and male pattern baldness to permanent infertility, chemical castration. That's the effect of this. How brief would the consult be? Fred arrived at his local clinic on North Fullerton Avenue in Montclair, New Jersey at around 11 o'clock a.m. That's the time he arrived, according to phone tracking data that his parents used to monitor his whereabouts. By 11:39, 39 minutes later, they received a text message from CVS. Fred's estrogen prescription was on its way. Within 39 minutes, strangers at a Planned Parenthood had given Fred a prescription and even called it into CVS for estrogen. Instead of a months-long evaluation by expert psychiatrists, a nurse practitioner had, in little over 30 minutes, prescribed their special needs son a powerful drug without their knowledge or consent. Quote, "It's criminal what Planned Parenthoods all over the country are doing," said Fred's mother, a New Jersey pediatrician. A pediatrician? She's a doctor for kids. It's really sad. Honestly, I'm glad they're telling this story, but it's sad that they went along with the, Fred. They started calling Fred a girl's name, remember, earlier in the piece? They kind of went along with this. And they unfortunately shoved Fred down this slippery slope. Most people have no idea this is happening, she says. Fred's story, corroborated through nursing and medical board complaints, locational data, prescriptions, text messages, emails, and other documents, all reviewed by the Washington Free Beacon, is a microcosm of how the nation's largest abortion provider is eroding the already thin guardrails on gender medicine in America. As wait lists swell at clinics like Children's National, and as concerns mount about the perils of rushed transition, many young people are now using Planned Parenthood to skip the line and circumvent these safeguards, making it much more difficult to gatekeep what was once a tightly regulated treatment. That dynamic has sparked criticism of the organization from an unlikely source: the liberal psychologist who helped bring pediatric gender medicine to the United States. Quote, "I've always been a very strong supporter of Planned Parenthood and am pro-choice," said Laura Edwards-Leeper, who co-founded the nation's first pediatric gender clinic. How cruel, by the way. How cruel. At Boston Children's Hospital in 2007. But they have taken on something that they are not equipped to handle, she says. The lack of gatekeeping is so bad, she added, that some of her patients received hormones from Planned Parenthood before coming to her for an assessment. Let me pause and make what should be an obvious point. How demonic of an organization is Planned Parenthood? They are dedicated to the destruction of children, whether it's before they're born or after. That's what this story tells me. How cruel. And this is happening in America. And everyone's in a fit of craziness about this. I say everyone, but the reality is this has moved very quickly. So many of our institutions buy into this crap. It's the lobotomy of our era. Maybe just cut out half their brain and they'll be fine. What? We look back on that like we were psychos. What was going on? Lobotomies? And now we're chopping up children and leaving them castrated and infertile, destroying them, rushing them through the process. It's so crazy. Others, like Erica Anderson, she's a former president of the U.S. Professional Association for Transgender Health, say that patients that they've sought to delay from transitioning have simply turned to Planned Parenthood. Quote, "I've had patients desperate to get hormones where I've been the voice of caution," said Anderson, who is transgender herself. I assume this is a man, then, as a result. In some cases, they say, "I'll just go to Planned Parenthood when I'm 18. Usually I can dissuade them, but sometimes I can't." Okay, is this not a red flag to you? If the transgender industry is saying, man, Planned Parenthood's kind of out of control, maybe a problem? Maybe a problem. Planned Parenthood is one of the largest providers of cross-sex hormones in the entire United States. Did you know that fact? One of the largest providers of cross-sex hormones in the entire country. Now, Planned Parenthood. And one of the fastest growing affiliates in the greater Portland area saw a nearly 400% increase in so-called gender-affirming care visits between 2021 and 2022, according to their annual reports, while those in Ohio saw a 544% increase over the same period. I got to believe where this is emanating from? TikTok. This has got to be TikTok. Every time. It's not mentioned in a lot of these stories, to the extent that we see stories on this subject at all. But TikTok, this Chinese freaking app that the Communist Party has injected into our country, they're governing what content appears in front of our young people and what doesn't. They are enabling and encouraging some of the most destructive things imaginable. So there's been an explosion. How do kids know to go to Planned Parenthood to get injected with cross-sex hormones? Where does that come from? There's been a 544% increase in Ohio between 2021 and 2022. Hormones now appear to be in higher demand than abortion at some branches. Planned Parenthood, known for killing babies, they're doing more cross-sex hormones now than they are baby killing. Maybe that's because all of the kids are infertile now. There are fewer babies to kill off. No unexpected pregnancies. A Planned Parenthood in Knoxville, Tennessee told NPR that nearly a fifth of its patients sought hormone therapy in 2021, whereas abortion makes up just 3% of Planned Parenthood's services nationally. That's what Planned Parenthood claimed. This growth has come as pediatric gender clinics, which used to wait months before prescribing hormones, are becoming more laissez-faire themselves. Some now prescribe hormones on the first visit, a Reuters investigation found last year, while others say ballooning caseloads have made it harder to conduct the kind of in-depth assessments once standard in the field. But with Planned Parenthood a constant temptation for older teens, even the most conservative clinics have an incentive to reduce gatekeeping if they don't want to lose patients. The result, Anderson said, is a race to the bottom that pulls all providers, no matter their philosophy, toward the informed consent model adopted by Planned Parenthood, which doles out life-altering drugs to almost anyone who requests them. And that model has alarmed even the liberal pioneers of gender medicine, who say that some 18-year-olds, especially those with special needs, cannot meaningfully consent to hormones without extensive counseling. It goes on and on here. This is a fantastic piece of reporting from Aaron Sibarium at the Washington Free Beacon. But to just drill it down to the essential point here, you think of Planned Parenthood as an abortion mill, as a place for baby death. They are out of control. They are out of control. They are also a place for the chemical castration of kids, for gender transitions without any meaningful roadblocks. You can't even, it's not even real. And they're subjecting them to this torture and a life of misery as a result. And here's, once again, just another awful piece of this. We're paying for it. We're paying for it. In 2022, Planned Parenthood took $670.4 million in government cash. Over $500 million U.S. taxpayer dollars go to Planned Parenthood. And that's only been going up. When they released their 2022 annual report, it showed that, first of all, that they had killed off 374,155 babies in 2022. That's how many kids were killed. That's the second most abortions Planned Parenthood has ever conducted in its entire history, National Review reports. And approximately 40% of all of the abortions performed in the United States. There's about 1 million performed each year. Planned Parenthood does 40% of them. The report indicates that Planned Parenthood has continued to cut back on regular old health services. They don't really do those anyway. Prenatal services have been falling there. They're not helping very much with miscarriage care. They're not really doing anything for adoption. They're not doing anything for sexually transmitted diseases. They're not really helping with pregnancy tests. No, they're not interested in any of those things. But cross-sex hormones and aborting children, yeah, they do a lot of that. They love doing that. That's their whole thing. And so they've had a massive increase in government money. It went in 2021 to 2022, they went up by 5.8%. And when you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. So as we choose another speaker, and they have to decide, what are the types of things we spend money on? How about not this? How about not this at all? Ever again. Cross-sex hormones and baby killing. Shouldn't be anywhere near the menu. In fact, we should probably start making some arrests, don't you think? Maybe some prison time for the people who are destroying children? Let's take a phone call. We've got Xavier calling in from Vienna, line 2. Xavier, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. I'll get real quick. You mentioned that those hormones that they're injecting into these autistic kids and whatnot are very often cause sterilization and
yes.
Infertility and whatnot. We should note that Planned Parenthood is following its foundational mandate because Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood are both heavily involved in the eugenics movement to rid society of undesirables.
Right.
So they're not out of control.
In fact,
they're following exactly what they're founded for.
In fact, I was just brushing up on this the other day because every so often I look at this because just like Margaret Sanger, a famous figure on the left, she's a eugenicist. She was a part of an effort to test birth control pills in the 1950s in Puerto Rico. And it led to all sorts of horrific consequences for poor women in Puerto Rico who were the guinea pigs for this, including several women died from it. And this was all designed to make it so that there would be fewer poor Puerto Rican women, and they would be the test subjects for her eugenics push.
Sounds like another Tuskegee experiment.
Yeah, it's just horrific, Xavier. Thank you for reminding us of that. Yeah, that's a great point. And Planned Parenthood has a long history of shoving chemicals into women and human beings to achieve such cruel genocidal ends. It's very, very dangerous stuff. And again, God bless the Washington Free Beacon for exposing this. Did you know that the Planned Parenthood was right now in 2023, one of the biggest pushers of cross-sex hormones in the entire country? It's an important detail. We got to stay switched on here. Coming up, Kevin Roberts joins us from the Heritage Foundation. We'll talk about the fight to become the next speaker. He's got some thoughts on the subject. Good afternoon to you. It's 5:35 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Real quick, there's been some craziness at the White House today over the fact that DHS put out the DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas indicated in the last 24 hours that there is an acute need to build some 20 miles of border wall on the Texas border now because there's all these illegal immigrants coming over. And that's been head spinning because everyone's like, wait a second, you're building a wall to try and secure the border? But then at the White House, the president said today, no, we don't have to build any border wall. I'm only doing it because the law is forcing me to, but border walls are ineffective. It led to this question at the White House.
Yeah, Peter.
Rita, just want to follow up very quickly. You said that it's not new, but to be clear that this was posted on the Federal Register overnight on October 4th. So just to be clear about this, the president...
Stand by. This is the cut we actually want.
If the border wall is ineffective, why is the Homeland Security Secretary saying that it's necessary to prevent unlawful entries into the United States?
I have not seen that full statement. I know. I hear you. I'm just saying I have not seen his full statement on that. What I can speak to is for the president. The president's been very clear that he doesn't believe it's effective.
Okay, so that's insane. So the DHS Secretary says we have to have it. It's a pressing need. The president says we don't need it. It's awful. Now the Cleanup Act has begun. Alejandro Mayorkas just put out a statement. I want to address today's reporting relating to a border wall and be absolutely clear, he says. I guarantee what comes next is going to be opaque. There is no new administration policy with respect to border walls. From day one, this administration has made clear a border wall is not the answer. That remains our position, and our position has never wavered. The language in the Federal Register notice is being taken out of context, and it does not signify any change in policy whatsoever, he claims. And so, anyway, this just goes on. He just says that we're compelled to do this by force of law, as if that's ever been the reason the Biden administration does anything. The administration believes that effective border security requires a smarter and more comprehensive approach, including state-of-the-art border surveillance technology and modernized ports of entry. All right, so this is Washington speak. This is a scam from Alejandro Mayorkas. Yesterday, he said, we definitely need border wall. Now he's saying there's been no change of policy. Crazy. Let's bring in Dr. Kevin Roberts. He's the president of the Heritage Foundation and the host of the Kevin Roberts Show. Sir, good to have you back with us.
Vince, it's always great to be with you. Thanks for everything you do for America.
Thank you, sir. Isn't it amazing, though, that we have Biden out there today saying that he doesn't want to secure the border, he's just forced to by law?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is the theme every time we talk, either on the radio or in person, that we are living through George Orwell's 1984. You know, it's one thing for a radical leftist administration to implement dumb policy. It's an entirely different thing to try to decipher the implementation of that dumb policy and then call it something else. I mean,
yes.
but let's keep in mind, as you often talk about, your audience knows, the whole point that their whole approach is to disorient us so we don't know what to believe. And ultimately, to wrap up on this response, they're doing this because they know that this is a dramatic political loser for them, not just for the presidency, but for almost every level of election next year.
Yeah. And on that point, if I can dwell on it for just a moment, and then we'll talk about the speaker's race. You know, I really do think that, and I was saying it earlier in the program, that the reason they're allowing this much chaos to take place is because it atomizes us. It actually breaks up our society. It breaks up the bonds that hold us together. It makes it so that it's harder to organize against the government, and it requires the government to consume more power to be the savior from all of the chaos they've created. I really think that that's the case.
Yeah, man, just keep injecting that de Tocqueville rhetoric into my veins. That is so important for us to remember. So many things I could say, but I'll limit myself to this one point. And it is the radical left has turned politics into our civil religion. And while it's very important that we follow politics and that we're involved in it, we try to affect the outcome of it, the most important thing we can do to minimize the effect of politics on our daily lives is to revitalize our communities, our institutions of civil society. We have to relegate it to the back seat. Otherwise, this nonsense, this Orwellian nonsense from Mayorkas and Biden actually doesn't just affect us in policy. It affects us hour by hour in our daily lives.
Yes, and it creates a lot of distrust in our communities, which creates more of that chaos. Let's jump into the speaker's race now. Obviously, this is a historic week. You know, Kevin McCarthy has been thrown out as Speaker of the House. A number of men have thrown their hat into the ring, including Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, Kevin Hern. What do you make of this speaker race? What should we be looking for as we consider who should be the next Speaker of the House? And more importantly, of course, what should members of Congress be looking for since they vote?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And no disrespect to those gentlemen who've thrown their hat in the ring or those who might, over the next few days. They know that. They would even say this, I hope, that the most important thing is not the personality. It's not the person who will be the next speaker. It's the commitments that person will make to good policy. And so what Heritage is saying is, and these are the conversations I'm having with these guys, actually even just in the last hour, you got to commit to making sure that when we pass the next short-term spending bill, that it has the language of House Resolution 2, the Great Border Security Bill. First and foremost, McCarthy had that deal for reasons you've covered. It fell apart. Heritage was a big proponent of that. What happened to McCarthy just a few days ago is now history. We really have to be zealously focused on that, both for economic reasons, but also for security reasons. But this is also important, and I give a hat tip to two of the three candidates thus far, Mr. Jordan and Mr. Hern, for saying Ukraine funding is not nearly as important as those two things. And we have to get those two things done first.
Yep.
That is economic stability and the lawlessness at the border before we even have a conversation about Ukraine. The more we sing from that hymnal, the better off this next speaker, whoever he or she will be. I
noticed that this is going to be one of the clear delineating lines, at least for Steve Scalise, because there's a lot of sympathy, as you would expect, empathy and appreciation for Steve Scalise. He survived an attempted massacre by a Democrat gunman, and thank God he's still with us. And he goes back to work in the United States Congress. Now he wants to run for Speaker of the House. But this issue, Ukraine, really is a dividing line between him and the other two men you just mentioned, Jim Jordan and Kevin Hern, because when these funding bills have come before Congress over the past year, Scalise has been on the side of voting to send much more money to Ukraine. Jim Jordan and Kevin Hern, they've been on the other side. They want more accountability and more focus on domestic issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I love Steve Scalise. He knows that. I've been a fan of his since he was in the Louisiana legislature, and a great man, a great patriot, and thank God he's still with us. And I'm grateful for his leadership. Having said that, if you know what time it is in America today, you know it is that even if you support more limited funding or additional funding for Ukraine, that where the conservative base is, I mean, almost everyone is at this spot, is that we must have a standalone bill, a standalone conversation about it. We are winning that argument. It has nothing to do with wanting anything other than the Ukrainians to be victorious, but it's about regular order, and more importantly, it's about putting Americans first. Scalise is going to have to reckon with that. That's the advice that I would give him purely from a policy and ideas standpoint. And I do think that Mr. Jordan and Mr. Hearn are in the right spot as it relates to where the conservative movement is.
Also, what is the end goal in Ukraine? That's an important question here. I want to play some audio. This is Jim Jordan this morning on Fox raising this, what appears to be a very complicated question. And it troubles me that a member of Congress doesn't have the answer yet.
Why should we be sending American tax dollars to Ukraine when we don't even know what the goal is? No one can tell me what the objective is. Is it some kind of negotiated peace? Is it driving them out of the eastern Ukraine? Is it driving them out of Crimea, which they've had for 10 years now, or they took during the Obama administration? What is the objective? And so until you can tell me the goal, I don't think we should continue to send money there, particularly when we have the problems we have on our border.
How is it possible that somebody who's now a candidate for Speaker of the House doesn't actually have the answer to that important question?
Well, it says everything about the foreign policy blob that for so many years and decades has run this country. And as you know, Vince, 18 months ago, Heritage was the first major organization on the political right to stand up and say, stop. That has nothing to do with anything other than our desire for Ukraine to win. But more importantly than that, it's that the American people, especially at this time of us being on the brink of civilizational decline, we require transparency. And this member, this is, you're not blaming Jim Jordan, I know that, nor am I. It says everything about how we have to obfuscate. The blob has got to obfuscate what reality is. And even those of us who merely ask the question, whether it's you, whether it's me, whether it's Jim Jordan, Kevin Hearn, whomever, if we merely ask the question,
yes, what
is the end game? Somehow we're vilified as being pro-Russia. It tells you we're over the target in terms of policy. And ultimately, this is the irony and really the tragedy. The more time the blob spends vilifying those of us who are asking fair, reasonable, just questions on the vilification of us, the less time we have to have the actual policy conversation about what we need to be doing.
On Jim Jordan for a moment, I don't want to dwell on these guys each if I can. On Jim Jordan, I like a lot of what Jim Jordan has to say. I think he's a great fighter for a whole bunch of things, including against the tyranny that we're seeing at the hands of our government. But I am concerned because the impression that Jim Jordan has left a lot of people with is that he's a little cozy with big tech in a way that we don't want a conservative fighter to be. And I'm looking for him to address that, I think, with some aggression, hopefully. I know, for instance, in the past, when Tim Cook came to Capitol Hill, he met with Jim Jordan, and I remember we had him here on the program, didn't we, Corey? And I asked him about it a bunch of times. What happened? Did you hold his feet to the fire? And I got a lot of political answers out of the guy. I'm concerned about that because, man, big tech has been a real source of tyranny in our country right now. Dr. Kevin Roberts, are you concerned about this?
I am. Jim Jordan is a friend. Talked to him today. He's excellent on most things. It's a matter of public record that Jim Jordan and the Heritage Foundation don't agree on what to do on big tech. In other words, I would say that he's wrong on it. And I do think that if he wants to reflect where the conservative movement is, he's a sharp, virtuous guy, that he's going to have to address that. He's going to have to give us some commitment on that policy front. So I do think that's a policy weakness of his. And yet I also know Jim to be a thoughtful guy and someone open to suggestions. So this is the point. In the next few days, each of these guys is going to have to figure out what they need to say about those things. But to your point, it can't just be rhetoric. It needs to be real substance, real timelines.
Yep.
I mean, frankly, guarantees about what the policy outcomes will be.
Well, this comes down to what you said a moment ago. Somebody who recognizes what time this is. It's our country is in desperate need of rescue, and there's a lot of forces who are looking to tear us down. We need somebody to help stop that. So then Kevin Hearn is the other. He's the head of the Republican Study Committee. That's a big coalition of Republicans in the House. Tell us about him. What do you think of Kevin Hearn?
Yeah, there's no doubt that members of your audience know the names Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan more, and there's good reason for that. They're good members. They may not know Congressman Hearn as well, for example, as we do at Heritage, and I do personally. He's head of the Republican Study Committee, which is an organization that's a cross-section of the Republican Conference. It's the right of center all the way to the right, ideologically, of the Republican Party in the House. Therefore, he's representing 175 members who really are the cross-section of the conservative movement. And so anyone who's the chair of the Republican Study Committee is in a good position to move up into leadership. Interestingly, as you no doubt know, Vince, both Jordan and Scalise once were chairs of the Republican Study Committee. And so as I've told other media folks, Heritage is always close to the Republican Study Committee because they, like we, represent the conservative movement. On Hearn, he's a businessman. He's from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He is an everyday American. He is someone, as I've gotten to know him really well in the last 2 years, and I really like him, is going to tell you the truth. He's not going to varnish it with a bunch of political rhetoric. He's a McDonald's franchisee. So this is a guy who sees things through the lens of the everyday American. And frankly, I think someone like Hearn would be kind of what the doctor ordered for America right now.
I did see some reporting. I think, was it Philip Wegman maybe reported this, that Heritage may soon make an endorsement in this race? Is that likely, Dr. Roberts?
Our 501c4 Heritage Action, which I now have the privilege of being the president of, legally can make an endorsement. It's not something we currently do because we have done. We like members to act first, but we're contemplating it. We've got some good candidates here. And we're really grateful that in spite of what happened earlier this week, we might be able to have a speaker who advances policy. For us, it's going to be all about policy, not about personality, but we are actively considering it.
Okay. And then finally, should Donald Trump be the next Speaker of the House, do you think?
Absolutely not. That's the worst idea I've heard this year.
Okay. It wasn't my idea. Don't blame me. Although they are saying
against you, but
they are saying he might show up next week for this.
President Trump, for whom we ought to have a lot of gratitude, needs to be focused on other things and put that rumor to rest. I can tell you it's not at all helpful for that dynamic to be injected into the speaker race right now.
Okay. All right. Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time as always. What was that Miley Cyrus song? I came in like a wrecking ball. Donald Trump, according to Fox News, Trump would accept House speakership for a short period while Republicans decide on a permanent replacement. This is Trump today, exclusive from Fox. Former President Trump told Fox News Digital he would accept a short-term role as Speaker of the House of Representatives to serve as a, quote, unifier for the Republican Party until lawmakers reach a decision on who should take on the post. That's actually laugh out loud funny. Representative Kevin McCarthy was removed as Speaker of the House Tuesday. We know all that. Let's advance to the Trump part. I have been asked to speak as a unifier, says Trump, because I have so many friends in Congress. If they don't get the vote, they have asked me if I would consider taking the speakership until they get somebody longer term, because I am running for president, he says. They have asked me if I would take it for a short period of time for the party until they come to a conclusion. I'm not doing it because I want to. I will do it if necessary, should they not be able to make their decision. You see, it's a matter of self-sacrifice. He would do it for the good of the country. He would become Speaker of the House. Can you imagine? Trump would be so happy to add that to his litany of titles. You know, billionaire, real estate magnate, President of the United States, Speaker of the House. He's done it all, ladies and gentlemen. He's throwing his hat, his hair. His hair sticks to his head. It's real. Remember Jimmy Fallon tugged on it, so he can't throw his hair in the ring. Trump did not specify who had asked him, although a number of GOP lawmakers have said he is their preference for Speaker. Since McCarthy's ouster, both House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jordan and House Majority Whip Scalise have both announced their runs to be Speaker. Trump stressed that if Republicans can't come to a consensus, he would take the speakership for a short 30, 60, or 90-day period. I would only do it for the party, he said. You know what they should do? Next week, pick a speaker. Not Trump. One of the guys, just pick him. And then next year for the State of the Union, make Trump Speaker of the House for just one day and have him stand right behind Joe Biden to give a visual commentary throughout the speech. That would be good. Maybe they can work that out with Donald Trump. Coming up next, the great one, Mark Levin, here on WMAL.